Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this very interesting little knife right here. This is the Spyderco Techno number 2. First off, though, I want to thank my Patreon patrons very much. Although Spyderco often sends me gear, this is a knife that I figured, you know what, damn it, I may end up wanting to keep this guy. And so I went ahead and I just bought this guy on my own, figuring that way I wouldn't have to worry about doing anything charitable with it. I could just, figure it out and, buy it, sell it, whatever. That made things a little bit easier. But the thing is, my Patreon patrons make it real easy for me to just go ahead and take the plunge. I want to thank them for that. Next thing, size comparison real quick. I'm going to do a lot of size comparison here because the size is kind of an important element of this. I mean, we'll start off with the standards. Here it is against Spyderco Delica. As you can see here, yeah, it's not a very big knife. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. And here it is against your Rat number 1. And so you can see here, again, not a very small knife. I'm sorry, not a very large knife, that is. It is reasonably small. But now I'd like to do some more non-canonical size comparisons right quick. Here it is against the rest of the Spyderco Marcin, Slysz, I guess, family. I always said Slysz, but apparently it's Slysz. But this is the whole family here. This is the Spyderco Spidey Chef on the top here. This is the Spyderco Slysz Bowie down at the bottom here. I'm really trying on this pronunciation, guys. But you can see here that they are very similar in design, but the Techno is by far the smallest among them. Here it is against another very small knife coming out of Spyderco. This is the McBee, which is actually sort of a natural comparison to the Techno because it is another small but excellently finished knife. Almost feels like a brother from another mother. And then here it is from a knife that feels also like a brother from another mother, but a very different mother. This is the CRKT Pilar, or Pilar, I guess. And so you can see here that in terms of overall size, in terms of overall sort of approach to the world, thick little frame lock, these are very similar knives. So there you go. Then finally, one quick set of size comparisons here. This is the Chris Reeve Knives Small Shabazz, and then here it is against the Chris Reeve Knives Menandi. And so you can see we're in that same basic size range here. The Menandi being the closest comparison in terms of blade length, but the Techno being considerably chubbier than either of those guys. Then finally, a quick note on this guy. I've actually had, not on my table, because I had this before I had a channel, but I owned a Spyderco Techno for a couple of years, actually, way back when. And honestly, it was a knife that I liked, but I never quite loved. The big part of it was the blade. And so when I heard that the Techno 2 was going to be a thing, I was really excited about that, especially hearing that they were going to make the blade maybe a slightly nicer shape, thin it out a little bit. That was really exciting to me. And so that's what's going on here. We'll go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. This very interesting little knife right here. The good side. To start with, okay, the price. The price on this guy is $220. Now, look, that is absolutely a chunk of change. But the simple fact is that this is substantially nicely made. We'll talk about that later, but there's really not anything that I know of that's nicer for the price. So, although there's a lot of competition with it, I think I am, at the end of the day, pretty okay with this price. It's excellently made. And so I'm going to go ahead. It's not like great. It's not like, oh, wow, value, but it is certainly not a bad price. And so I'll go ahead and put it in the good, for lack of a better place to put it. If there was the good, the neutral, the bad, the ugly, I'd be more on that, but it is what it is. Next thing, I always love the Maker's Mark out of Marcin Slysz here. He's a very, very neat little approach, and I think it always looks cool. It's cool to see it there. Next thing, the size on this guy is quite nice. So if we measure this guy blade length-wise, we are coming in just over 2.5 inches, like they're saying 2.55 inches. That's, depending on where you're going to be at, it's probably right over the line, or maybe it's right on the line, depending on how much the cop likes you. But the simple fact, though, is that the size is going to be nice for a lot of people. If the law says 2.5, you can probably get away with carrying this as long as you're not doing anything too problematic. And it's nice to see Spyderco making a high-end, beefy little knife for a smaller size human, or a smaller size law area. So I like that very much. And actually, the ergonomics on this guy for my relatively small hands aren't particularly bad at all, because you've got this little area here for your index finger to live into, and then you've got, for me at least, maybe 2.5, a 3-finger grip. I mean, I've got some grip on the back side there, but it's absolutely, it works pretty well. And I find myself choking up even a little bit further on it, and that positions the pocket clip a little bit better and puts it in a nicer place in the hand. But nevertheless, the ergos on this guy, at least for me, pretty decent. There's a clip hotspot we'll talk about. But yeah, next thing, the jimping on this guy is quite nice. The original Techno had jimping that really wasn't doing all that much for anybody, but this has something a little bit more, frankly, interesting, a little bit more attractive, and a little bit more effective for that matter. It just feels a lot nicer in the hand, and so I have to applaud that. That's a nice step up there. Speaking of nice steps up, the blade on this guy is way nicer than the original one. It still remains a very nice blade, but you can see here it is made out of CTS XHP, which is absolutely a great steel. It's good to go. It is using thinner stock than the original Techno, which was definitely a needed change. It is using a sheep's foot style blade, which I find to be a very useful sort of arrangement, especially with this guy. You can really get that finger up there in this size and do some nice utility cuts, draw cuts in this domain. And it absolutely does work, and it cuts, and it's ground actually quite aggressively, to the point where it is actually quite capable of doing things like basic cardboard cutting. Certainly, you know, I switched at one point in time. I was doing some some cardboard mock-up stuff, and I switched at one point to the Kapara. It was like, oh, that's a slicey knife, but nevertheless, this works. It's okay. And so I like very much the improvement in the blade stock, the thinning of the blade stock, as well as just the overall shape of the blade, I think is a little lot nicer. One other thing to note is that this new version is actually, this is based on a custom by the maker, by Marcin Slysz, I'm trying, called the Mouse, and this is based on the Gen 2 mouse, and it's actually relatively true to the original design, to the Gen 2 design, that is, and I like that very much. I appreciate the fact that Spyderco is willing to update it along with the custom there, and I really do find this to be, frankly, a little bit more attractive than the original Techno. The original Techno had a blade that was kind of like, oh, we're just gonna go with belly from ours, and you know, certainly I understand having a little bit of belly, but this feels like a slightly more practical blade shape, and honestly, I find it just to be a more attractive version. I like this guy aesthetically better than I like the first Techno, and that's kind of a beautiful thing. So to me, all of that is the good, is that it's a more attractive knife. It is true to the second generation Slysz custom here. It is a much nicer blade with massively improved jimping. The ergos are pretty decent, nice size. I'm loving the maker's mark here, and it is $225 bucks, which I feel like is, given everything, pretty decent. Actually, let's talk about that everything. The everything on this guy is that this is a beautifully made knife in many, many ways. This is made by the Spyderco Taichung plant. See right here, Taichung. It's out of Taiwan, but the simple fact is that is Spyderco's, I think, highest fit and finish plant. Certainly Golden can do almost as well, if not as well, in some domains, but Taichung really puts out great work. And the simple fact is that as we manipulate this guy, there is a lot of joy here. It's beautifully finished. The titanium is very nicely done with a bit of darkening, and not quite the same stonewashy feeling as on the Slysz buoy, which I do kind of miss a little bit. I would have preferred to see that go on again. But it has a beautiful blade. The grinds are just very, very nice. You can see here that there's a little bit of a mirroring going on here on this blade, which is a beautiful thing. I think it makes the knife a little bit more compelling than it otherwise would have been. It is a nice step up over, for instance, on this guy, the Spidey Chef, which doesn't have that same mirroring. I think it's a nice effect. That mirrored stonewash is beautiful. It also has what was sort of the Techno's hallmark, was the bank vault sort of construction. You open this guy and, oh yeah, that's locked into place. And the Slysz buoy, damn it, had a very similar feeling of just like, no, we're locked. And it locks up very, very super securely, with a nice late lockup on this guy. Not like terminally late, but it's like, 70% or something like that, which is absolutely going to be solid. A lot of people complain about that, but honestly, I think that's not a problem at all. As long as it's not like 100% or not like 10%, I think you're good to go and lock up front here. But the overall feeling that you get off of this guy, and then also it's on phosphor bronze washes, and it is very, very, very smooth. This is a glassy pivot, and it's smoothing out more and more as I use it more and more. It's just a beautiful, beautiful freaking pivot. And I like that very, very much. Honestly, what strikes me most about this knife is that fit and finish, is that quality. One of the things that people said about the original Techno a great deal is that it is sort of a little Cadillac. This is a small knife, but it is a knife that is made just as well as pretty much anything else out there in the industry. That's maybe not true. You can go higher end and do a little bit better, but the simple fact is that there is nothing better made for the price. I looked through my list of reviews, and there was nothing out there that struck me as like, Wow, that was way better done for the price of this. Maybe you disagree. Feel free to leave something down in the comments here, but this has the distinction of being at 220 bucks, just better finished than pretty much everything else out there. And I really like that a lot, and I think it's a nice entry level to the super high end before you get into your Shabazz country, which in many ways I feel like the comparison is not unfair. The smoothness is not out of line. I mean, they're very different knives, but in terms of overall approach, there's a lot of similarity there. And so to me, that's what's great on this, guys, that it is just beautifully, beautifully made. And I can't think of anything that is better made for this price point. On the bad side, to start with, the blade here is, like I said, it's coming in around 2.5 inches here. Depending on how much the cop likes you, this is going to be over or under 2.5. I don't really know. Whatever it is, it's I'd kind of like to see him stay a little shy of the line, a little shorter, than a little longer, because that removes a question of uncertainty. It's probably not going to be an issue, but it's certainly something to consider. Next thing, again, Spyderco has done this thing where they're favoring the lanyard hole over the clip. I don't know what's going on. Spyderco invented the pocket clip, and so it's like I'm wondering if the lanyard hole mafia has taken over. It's like Eric Glesser, blink twice during the next interview if you are taken over. I don't know, but the thing is they have moved this clip a little bit. Unfortunately, the clip is a little bit less at least to my mind, it's a little less comfortable in this positioning here, because it provides a pretty strong hot spot in the back here if you're grabbing all the way back. You get a fair amount of hot spotitude off of these two ends of the clip here. I love the Spyderco wire clip, and by the way, it is a great clip. It works well, and I think that there's not an unfair amount sticking out of the pocket there, but it is definitely a hot spot, and I would have kind of preferred to see the clip maybe canted off to the side and a little bit higher up, and not, necessarily given the lanyard hole the kind of favor that it seems to be getting these days over at Spyderco HQ. So that's not a great thing. Next thing, the titanium on the old one. I don't have the old Techno here to compare, so take this with a grain of salt. But a lot of folks are saying, and I believe that the Techno 1 has a slightly thicker set of. The 2 has a slightly thicker set of scales here. It feels like, although the blade was definitely shrunken down, the overall size and finishing of the guy, in terms of width, seems about equivalent. It just feels like the frame itself got thicker. And that leads, whether that happened or not, I'm not going to take a super strong stance. Like I said, I can't measure the old one. But it is a chubby little bunny right here. This is a thick little knife. If I take out my my caliper here, we can see that this guy comes in the pocket around half an inch, 0.47 inches here. That's non-trivial. And it's also a little bit on the heavy side, especially in terms of the overall size here. We are coming in here at 3.52 ounces for 2.5 inches of blade. That's, it's heavy. Now, is it like heavy? No, absolutely not. There are much heavier knives out there, but it's a chubby little bunny, that's for damn sure. And if you're looking for something that's very compact, remember, you can get the same blade size in something much, much smaller with like a Menandi or frankly, any other damn knife out there. So, that's something to consider. Next thing, they have gone, the balance is a little bit further back on this guy. What I mean by that is, well, the balance feels like it's, someplace it's hard to measure exactly, but it's someplace in here, and it feels a little bit back heavy. It's not a big deal, but I would kind of like, and especially given that the scales seem to have been made a little thicker, maybe that could have been moved forward a little bit. Whatever, that's a subjective thing. One thing that really does bug me a lot about this guy, and the first thing that I would say is just genuinely like, about this guy, are the standoffs. Now, look, I don't entirely understand why they moved from a very nice G10 backspacer on the original Techno to these set of standoffs here. Maybe it's cost cutting, maybe there's some other thing I'm not thinking about. Maybe it just wouldn't have fit with the backspacer. I don't freaking know, but the simple fact is that, unfortunately, they went with the Z Hunter green here. Here, color comparison. Yeah, that's not doing it for me, and honestly, it feels a little bit less interesting. I like backspaces. I think they can add a lot to a knife, and that's a thing that, on the Slysz Bowie definitely made. The original Techno and the Slysz, this was a nice blue, and just gave it a little bit more flair. And to move now to the zombie green backspace in here, I don't honestly get it. Maybe there must be some reason for it, I'm assuming, but I don't get it. I'm not a big fan of it particularly, and I would have much preferred that they used a backspacer. And if I was planning to keep this knife in the long term, I would have absolutely looked at, there were people making like carbon fiber backspacers for it already. I think that would be a nice upgrade for the guy. So to me at least, that's what's bad here, is that it's got the Z Hunter green standoffs here, when the backspacer on the original was quite nice. It's got the thicker titanium. The balance is maybe a little further back, although that's certainly a nitpick here. And it is a chubby little bunny. The lanyard hole got moved up and the clip down, which Okay, Spyderco. And then it is just over the legal line at 2.55 inches a blade. On the ugly front, there's only one issue here that I consider ugly, and this is something that you will probably get past pretty quickly, but the simple fact is that this guy is not a particular joy to open. So there are a couple of reasons for that. To start with here, look at this. There's this little kind of crescent area where the hole is exposed. And so in order to get in there, you're kind of having to slide your thumb in very vertically. You can't get in there obliquely as you can, for instance, on some of the other knives. What's a good example of this? Okay, the Delica, for instance. You can slide in this way. And given, this is certainly kind of a hallmark of the Slysz design. I'm not going to complain too much about that. But so that's the start. Then, as you're moving out, this has a relatively strong detent. I mean, okay, Taichung, now you give me a strong detent. I'm not a big fan of that particularly. But so it's a little tough to get out of there, especially if you've got your fingers resting on the lock bar on the other side there. Then, as you're kind of coming around here, you hit this little corner. And this little corner, absolutely, you can see that it just barely it intrudes on the spider hole there. It's not terrible, but the problem is that your finger is going to be sticking out of the spider hole a little bit, and each time it is going to snag just a little bit. So you end up kind of having to lift and roll your finger up in order to get back around that there. Now, look, in practice, is this a big deal? No, not really. I think I've been able to pull it off. There's never been a case where it's like, oh, I completely screwed that up, or anything like that. And especially if you're happy to flick, then that extra detent is nice, and this flicks beautifully. You just barely feel this guy. But the simple fact is, I'm not a big fan of the opening here has just become an issue where I don't feel like it was in the original. Again, I don't have the original in hand. Maybe I'm just rose-colored glasses into the past, but it's just not a knife that I particularly enjoy opening. And especially with that detent, I find myself very often doing something like this, where I'm sort of pinching from both sides to help me pop the detent out and to keep the lock bar pressure off. That lets it get out of there, and then, kind of lifting the finger up there. It's not something I'm super in love with. I would absolutely get used to this. If this was my only knife and this was the only thing I planned to carry, I'm sure that after a few months it would be, or weeks, or, who knows. I carried this for like maybe a week and change. I would feel a lot better about it. But as it stands, this little thing particularly, this little guy right here, I feel like this knife might just be better if this were knocked down a little bit or sloped out a little bit or something. That would just make this a little bit easier to work with. And that's not been an issue that they've had on, even though the other Slysz knives, Swish, damn it, have had this, the angles have been different such that it's not really been a concern. And so I don't know. There's a little tiny issue there, and unfortunately it's just a little bit of a pain in the neck every time you open the knife. Not a big deal, but it's certainly a deal, and it's something that I do find ugly that I would much rather not see in this model in the future. So if there's a Techno 2.5, just rock that off a little bit. Heck, like I said, if I was keeping this guy, that would probably be something I'd be attacking myself with a belt sander. Let's be real. So, a final conclusion here. Look, I was really looking forward to this knife. Because at some level, Techno with a slicey, better blade was just music to my ears. Like, I liked the Techno idea a lot. And the knife was substantially nice. It just never quite landed with me. I just ended up selling it. Indeed, the blade on this guy is just better. Thinner stock makes this better, and honestly, much of what made the original Techno great kind of remains here. Most importantly, I think it remains the best fit and finish bang for the buck out there, or at least certainly the best one that I'm thinking of. And I went through my list. I was trying to find something. No one is going to sell you a smoother, nicer knife for less that I know of, and particularly the little details like the finishing here. It really does add something to it. And I think it is a very nice option for folks who are dealing with 2.75 or even 2.5-inch laws out there in the world. This is a high-end knife that you can carry in that domain that's not a whole heck of a lot of money. Unfortunately, though, I also feel like this is a bit of a mixed bag. As although they improved the blade by a mile, the handle absolutely took a couple of hits here. Pardon me. To start with, they thickened it up a little bit, or at least it feels a little bit thicker to me. Overall, they knocked down a little, because I believe the original Techno had this stonewash pattern. Again, I wish I had one present here, but nevertheless, it just feels maybe a little bit less than in that domain. Certainly one area where it really does fall down is the backspacer. I'm just not a fan of that, or at least the standoffs then. The fact that the backspacer managed to get Z-hunted here just doesn't do it for me. And the opening went from fine, as I recall, to a little bit of an obstacle course to get out there. And see, I just slipped off the blade there, because this guy guy ramped me off. And I've done that a number of occasions, and I'm not a big fan of it. But anyways, so that to me is unfortunately a set of reductions. If it was just the Techno 1 but with a better blade, I feel like I would be in a much nicer position with this guy, but there are a couple of little downsides. There's also a lot of competition now. I mean, for the exact same price as this guy, you can get yourself the Spyderco Spidey Chef, which is unquestionably an incredible knife. This right here is a gem, and it's a gem I didn't give enough credit to this first time around. So much so that I went back and I bought one again after selling mine to Frankie and freaking Bird, because I'm an idiot. But nevertheless, and so this is a really nice piece of competition for it, and it's exactly the same price. If you're also looking for high-end fit and finish in a small size, you might actually consider the Spyderco McBee, which is another really interesting little knife. It honestly feels like it's very similar in finishing and overall life approach to this guy, just at a much smaller size and much smaller price. If you like the idea here and you don't mind paying a little bit more money, this is sort of competing with the Shabazz, or with the Menandi more specifically, in terms of overall blade length. These guys are going to be some major competition, and they are both doing the high-end fit and finish thing pretty well. And honestly, this knife makes me mourn the Slysz buoy, swish buoy, damn it, I'm trying, all the more, because honestly, oh man, this is so, I'm not going to drive the freaking secondary prices up any further. Again, this is not a $400 knife. Do not feed the trolls. Anyways, I digress. The biggest piece of competition to me, honestly, and weirdly enough, is this little guy. This is the CRKT Pilar. Now, this is a very cheap knife. This is like $25. And certainly, fit and finish-wise, this is miles behind. They are not doing the same thing here. This is a high-end production knife, and this is HCR13 MOV and Teflon washes. It is not exactly doing the same thing, but emotionally and spiritually, they seem to be doing something rather similar, and actually, ergonomically, I think I like the Pilar more than I like the Techno 2 here. In fact, I will definitely say that I like the Pilar more. But they're both small, overbuilt sort of things, and because, you know, one nice thing this guy has is it's secure, it's heavy, it's dense. I mean, they're both doing something similar, and so if you're looking at this thinking, wow, I really like that approach, but I'm not coming anywhere near that price, honestly, the Pilar is something to consider, and especially now that Cricut is trying out higher-end steels. Like, if they did the original model with the S35 VN, that would be a really nice thing. And once they figure out that Foster Bronze washes are a thing, holy crap, they're going to have a winner on their hands. But nevertheless, this is something you're going to want to consider if you're looking at the Techno 2, but balking at the price point. But I do think, you know, for me personally, this didn't turn out to be a keeper, despite the fact that I got this guy specifically thinking, oh, wow, I'm going to want to hold on to this one. I don't think I am, actually. And this is probably more unique to me than anything, because I have a lot of really nice smaller options. It would be very hard for me to carry this guy rather than the Menandi, or even the Shabazz here. It would be very hard for me to carry it relative to if I'm looking for something swishy. It'd be hard for me to carry this over the buoy or the Spidey Chef or something like that. I've got a lot of small options, and so that's not really the chief sort of thing. And frankly, I like the other designs by Marcin Swish better than this guy. I like the buoy, I like the Chef just more, frankly, just more. And none of them have that opening issue. And so after a little while carrying this guy, I found myself having to push myself to continue carrying it for review, feeling like, okay, I should probably give the Techno more time, but it didn't change anything. And so ultimately, this is not a knife I'm going to be holding on to. It's a beautiful knife, but it's not a knife that's like, oh yeah, I want one of these. But that said, I still think it's going to be an interesting choice for many. I am in many ways a knife snob. I've got a lot of interesting options in the higher end, and so as a result, the main thing that this has going for it, that tiny Cadillac thing, is a little bit less prominent for me. But it is a real thing. This is in many ways sort of a baby Shabazz. If you're thinking about like, oh wow, I'm really interested in a high-end washer action knife, this is a great way to get started on that. It's a great way to look under that. It's also a nice thing that, you know, if you're in a 2.5 inch or an under 3 inch area, it's a nice way to try something on the higher end as well. Because again, the price is up there, but it's not so incredible. And honestly, until the Python comes out, this I think is the peak of Spyderco's high-end fit and finishing. This is kind of it, because it's got your mirror stone wash blade. It's just beautifully made overall. I mean, you can make an argument for the Velotten being, you know, toward the top right now, but right now this is sort of of Spyderco's Halo piece in terms of finishing, which is kind of odd, but that may be something that's interesting to you as well. So ultimately, my feelings on this, guy, is that the Techno 2, it's a very nice knife, 100%. And like I said, I suspect that my little opening issues would probably go away pretty quickly as I develop the specific muscle memory required to not fall off of the hole as I'm trying to avoid hitting this thing, or as I did more often, just as I flick it more and more, because the flick really does feel like the better approach on it. But if you're looking for something that is a lot of finishing in a relatively small package at a price that's actually pretty competitive for what you're getting here, then I think technically this should be high on your list. Okay. Anyways, I hope this was interesting to you, that you didn't mind my swishing out the pronunciation of the name, and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.